Hello, everyone. Good morning. This is In Your Element with Ardis and Erin. This is a news episode today, and we're going to be talking all about the news in higher education, what's hot, some of the more kind of juicy stories in there. Erin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks. Excited. Yeah, we have a lot of big news. It's been a big couple of weeks and excited to talk about it.
So the first thing that we're going to start with, and we'll get right into it, we have quite a few, but we're going to talk about college rankings. U.S. News and World Report, they released their rankings, and no surprise there, they're still using ACT and SAT and ACT scores in the mix. The one thing that they did in order to validate or to change, they changed the weight of those particular scores. So I believe it was around 7.5%, and that went down to about 5% in how that contributes to the score. Now, we all know that this scores were almost non-existent last year, so I'm not sure why this is still happening and why the ACT and SAT scores are a big part of the college rankings. Thoughts, Erin?
Yeah, I think there are problems with the ACTs and the SATs in general. We've discovered more and more. I think that most people in higher ed had their suspicions, but the data is proving out that they're not necessarily a measure of or a great predictor on how well students are doing. There's a lot of bias built in and baked into the tests. And U.S. News and World Report rankings, too, have had similar, I almost think of it as like a love-hate within the schools themselves. They love to be on the list. They want to be high on the list, but then they're angry at the list because, it's so hard to move and it's kind of locked tight. So it really is, I think the student gets lost in both of these conversations, and parents and families trying to use these guides and these, tests. We're kind of out in the wilderness a little bit. And so what's going to come next? I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah. So obviously, in any industry, you have your comparisons, you have your charts, you have everybody rankings, and rankings become super important when you look at universities. Obviously, one of the things that we need to move towards is that not, those top schools are not the right schools for every student. So connecting the right student to the right school sometimes is not necessarily about the rankings, but it's all about the fit and how that fits into that student's, outcome, and how essentially tying outcomes to student success. And student success becomes a bigger conversation, rather than just looking at a particular ranking and saying, okay, this is a top 10 school. Yes, in terms of the marketing and the degree, the degree weight after you come out of school, it's important. However, what we're seeing is that education is moving more and more towards re-education and kind of this constant ability for you to get upskilled in your field. So we know that today, every 7 years, the average adult needs to re-upskill and kind of needs to take another look at their education, or at least take some kind of courses as part of their work or as part of their career changes. So with us moving towards that, it becomes the rankings, take another meaning, right? Take another meaning around your experience through college. So that doesn't mean that schools are still not obsessing over this, right? The national rankings are still a point of obsession. A lot of schools, especially the ones who are at the top of those lists, are trying to get even higher, and they build that as part of their strategic plans, right? So that is part of the strategic plans. Recruitment, application decisions and kind of the admission rates, those are all contributing to this ranking. So schools are very careful in terms of how they think about that and how they move that forward. We're probably going to have a lot more to talk about in terms of the rankings and then where different schools are. If you haven't, just check it out. Obviously, there was a few. Not many surprises there, but there was a few kind of changes and movements in terms of top 10. I believe one of the North Carolina schools did really well and Duke kind of moved into that top 10 spot. So there's a few interesting changes there as well. So take a look at those. The next item that we're going to talk about is continuing the students and student success and retention and admissions. Schools are having, there was new data that was put out by the U.S. Department of Education, and it confirms that, of course, there was a decline in student enrollment and student retention during the COVID from fall 2019 to fall 2020. But it also confirms that the retention was down and the numbers were down, skewed depending on the types of institutions as well. So the preliminary data put together says that there was fewer nationwide, over 500,000 students decline in terms of the enrollment, and a large portion of those were students from community colleges as well, which were affected disproportionately. A lot of community colleges or public two-year institutions enrolled a lot fewer students, and they saw a 15% drop as well. Erin, thoughts?
It's very concerning. It's troubling. It's hate to see almost hopefully it won't be a whole generation, but there's going to be a big gap in kind of the upward mobility of some of these students if we don't start to correct these trends. I think it's about a third of the US's undergraduate populations go to community colleges. So if you think they're down 15%, that's a huge amount of the U.S. populations who aren't attaining higher education degrees, and that has, impact on personal families, on the wider economy. So I think we really need to look into. I think we know why it's hard to get an education during a pandemic, but that's not enough. How do schools it's a collective project to improve this, to give support. It's not something, one company or one school is going to fix. It's going to need to be a lot of, I think, public-private partnerships.
Yeah. Specifically, one of the other things that we're noticing, and we're seeing this also from our work with different partner institutions, is this, the reduction in fewer employees being available and fewer employees working. So we see a huge drop in employees, and specifically, traditionally what we've seen is that the pipeline for guidance counselor or college counselors, for example, to review applications and to kind of give tours, and those were traditionally current students, so they were working with the admissions offices. And what's happening is that because of COVID, obviously everybody was remote, so they don't have those students anymore. And usually they transition into becoming, recruiters and kind of moving through that chain. So that's usually the career transition. And because of this lack of non-physical opportunities, that pipeline is kind of broken, and then we're going to see a bigger gap in there as well. That's going to be noticeable a little, going into 2021, 2022 as well, and going into this next recruitment cycle. So the next one I wanted to talk about, so we're going to switch from the business of admissions and recruiting to actually looking at the vendor side and kind of some of the changes that are happening on the companies and the ecosystem that's supporting higher education as well. Blackboard to merge with Anthology, forming new edtech giant. So this was a big news, especially from our perspective as well, given that we play in the edtech space. Blackboard is one of the behemoths in terms of the learning management systems that a lot of schools have adopted. I actually used Blackboard when I was in college. It was one of the first ones. I can't comment if it was good or not, but it was probably the only game in town at the time, and they kind of slowly absorbed a lot of the smaller players, some of the open source players at the time as well, and they became the de facto. So they grew really quick, they grew fast, and they kind of became really big. A few years back, they got bought by private equity. So, basically what this merger means is that Anthology, we're assuming that Anthology, which is a combination of 3 different companies led by campus management, the new company was formed, I believe it was last year, but now they are adding the Blackboard to their portfolio. So the 2 companies together have, I guess there was the LMS component was always missing. So they have the SIS, the engagement or CRM components, and then now the LMS is part of under that umbrella as well. Now, whenever something like this happens, of course, there's going to be a lot of different analysis in the market. What does this mean? What does it mean for schools? What does it mean for the vendor? What does it mean for the ecosystem? Mergers are never, they're good for the company, or they're good sometimes for the client, but they're not necessarily good for competition. They're not necessarily good for the ecosystem. So something to think about is, how is this going to help the student? How is this going to help that school, right? So how are these mergers gonna do that? And that's a question that we can't answer right now. And obviously, strategically, from the company side, that means that you can have a better offering, better integrations, and so on and so forth. But we've seen over and over that these take a really, really long time, and traditionally multi-years of incorporating, integrations. And even then, we see schools moving very slowly in that direction. So from a school's perspective, I guess nothing really changes. But from an edtech perspective, we're seeing consolidation happening more and more. What do you think, Erin?
I was thinking about the schools themselves, how this will affect them. And, I'll take off my cynic hat for a little bit and think about that there is some really helpful data that can come out of this by pulling data from all those different places of how the learners are learning. We could learn some actually worthwhile things about, we talk about the dream of a personalized education. Like maybe this will help to inform things like that. But from a product engineering point of view, to integrate all of these and experience, my head basically exploded, because it's so hard, and these are already really big systems, to get them to all work nicely together, which I think is one of the benefits that the companies we're talking about. That's a huge thing to do.
Exactly. And of course, we see some of the other, one of the other things that Blackboard has done is international. They have an international footprint, and they also have an K through 12 footprint as well. So those things are something that I'm sure Anthology would love to kind of go into those markets as well. Well, kind of following that, but now on the other side, more on corporate, or at least non-higher ed. I know that a lot of higher education institutions use Mailchimp, which is the marketing platform and a kind of email platform. And it's not specific to higher education, but it's kind of a general platform as well. We've seen the product and the company kind of go through a lot of different growth and changes. Well, Intuit, which is the maker of QuickBooks and that helps a lot of small businesses, TurboTax. So if you've used any of those, Credit Karma, they are the makers of those products, or at least the parent company. They acquiring Mailchimp for a tremendous amount of money. So it almost makes that deal in higher education, the merger between Anthology and Blackboard, seem pretty small, right? So the combined companies, I believe, was about 1 billion and 2 billion kind of valuations there. So as we move into here, we see a 12 billion acquisition for Mailchimp. We know that the market size matters quite a bit, and the way that Intuit is thinking about it, or at least why this is important, is the focus on helping small businesses and kind of the importance of their marketing and the importance of the relationships and kind of the help that they need, the digital transformation, right? So Mailchimp is all about providing this digital transformation, marketing, digital in a digital format for small businesses, and Intuit does the same thing, providing help, HR, finance, and all those support as well. So now adding the marketing component, knowing that it becomes super, super important to run any small business now, you need marketing, you need automation, you need this digital outreach to your customers. So anyways, that's the equivalent, or perhaps one of the things that we wanted to highlight as well. Erin, thoughts?
I really love this. I've watched Mailchimp grow since the beginning, and they have really excellent help documents. I know we've talked about in the past. So anybody who wants to take a look, I just love the services they provide, the way that they've grown as the functionality that they offer, and I think it's a really interesting time to be living, where you can have a small business and you have all the tools that used to be, these barriers to entry. They're slowly coming down, or maybe it's fast. That's debatable. But you can hire a couple of content people or do it yourself if you have that background, and you can really grow a thriving business. And I think that Intuit sees that. We've seen how other providers like, Square, for example, it's a smaller one, but they do payments, but they also do landing pages and sites so that people can actually have a way to get customers. And I think that that's just a super exciting time to be able to, small businesses historically have been the engine of our economy. So while this is a giant, big merger, at the end of the day, it's kind of empowering smaller companies to grow.
Yeah, exactly. The mirror here in higher education is that as we saw, offices, admissions and recruiting offices, and also the staff and budgets are getting smaller and smaller in institutions, and they operate a lot like small businesses as well, trying to be very frugal about the outreach and kind of how much they're spending on their marketing, knowing that they need to spend on marketing and they need to kind of lead with that digital marketing first, because student expectations are completely changing. And the digital transformation acceleration has happened. I think one of the quotes was 10 years within a span of 6 months or less than a year during COVID. So the adoption there. So we, as folks who are kind of helping or who are supporting higher education leaders, you kind of need to look at this as how do you go from using point solutions, meaning like, hey, I have this tool that does only this, I have this tool that does only that, I have this tool that does only that. But now look at solutions that are kind of putting all these things together, because ultimately you need to do a lot more of it, and kind of sending data back and forth between different systems becomes very cumbersome. So you need to look at new ways of getting to your student, putting that student first, and adopting to the way that they want to be reached and the way they want to be recruited, rather than, following your own processes. All right. The last one that I had in here, which is kind of an interesting one, was Pearson sues Chegg, copyright infringement. So this is the other side of what happens if companies collaborating together and something happens, and then we got lawsuits. Well, Pearson, everybody knows who they are, but essentially they're a huge part of the textbooks and educational material out there. And Chegg, as we know, it's also another provider of kind of taking some of this information and providing it for students. The lawsuit here is mostly around copyright infringement, around the materials or the answer keys for some of the textbooks and things like that are being distributed through Chegg. Not sure where this leads us, but figured we would want to mention it just for the sake of it. We thought it was interesting. Well, with that, I feel like we've gone a little bit longer today as well. It was kind of a packed news day. It was great talking to Erin, and as always, we'll be back. Actually, we will be back on Monday with our product focus in your element episodes. We have not decided yet what our key theme is going to be for Monday, because we have so many great ideas coming up, or just because we're kind of, we haven't dedicated the time to it. But stay tuned. We'll post on social, and we'll keep you posted.
Yep, it'll be good. That's all we can guarantee.
Of course. Always. Bye, everybody.
Bye.